Right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a massive, high-stakes legal battle. On one side, you have the Commission on Audit. They're essentially the ultimate guardian of the public purse. And on the other side, you've got the Banco Central ng Pilipinas, the central bank, whose main job is to shield the entire nation's economy. When two titans like this clash over how to read the law, believe me, the ripples hit the entire financial system.
9.312 billion pesos. Yeah, you heard that right. That is definitely not a typo. We are talking about billions in public funds caught in a literal tug of war between competing legal mandates. This isn't just some simple accounting error, you know? It's a fundamental disagreement over who gets the money and, honestly, more importantly, how the rules of the game are written in the first place.
Section 1. The billion peso clash.
So the absolute core of this dispute really boils down to one simple question: to deduct reserves or not to deduct reserves. Think of it kind of like your own household emergency fund. The central bank wanted to lock away a portion of its earnings for a rainy day before remitting its mandatory dividends to the national government. But the Commission on Audit stepped in and said, no way, you have to split the gross amount. No emergency funds allowed.
Section 2. A compromise and a catch. To see how we got here, it all started way back in 2006. A routine audit found what COA considered a 2.1 billion peso understatement in dividends, basically arguing the central bank was illegally keeping reserves. By 2010, COA completely doubled down to enforce that collection. And then finally in 2011, they reached a massive 9.3 billion peso settlement covering the years up to 2006. So the central bank essentially paid up to settle the past.
But here's where things get really interesting, the catch. While COA accepted that multi-billion peso settlement for the years 2003 to 2006, they didn't just walk away. They used that 2011 resolution to lock in a strict no reserves allowed rule for the year 2007 and all subsequent years. They essentially said, okay, we're settled for the past, but going forward, you can never deduct an emergency fund again. This sweeping mandate for the future is exactly what forced the central bank to escalate the battle all the way to the Supreme Court.
Section 3. Judging the future.
Before even glancing at the banking laws, the Supreme Court actually had to deal with COA's attempt to govern the future, and they ruled that COA's mandate for 2007 onwards was a void judgment. Why? Well, because you simply cannot make binding decisions on transactions that haven't even happened yet, let alone been audited. You literally can't audit the future. This was a massive procedural win for the central bank.
Section 4. The Battle of the Laws.
Now, to really understand what they were fighting about, we've got to look at a legal concept called implied repeal. Basically, this happens when a new law is so fundamentally contradictory to an older one, courts just have to assume the new law overwrote the old one. COA's argument was that a newer 1993 dividend law effectively overwrote the central bank's older charter.
When you put these two rules head-to-head, the contradiction is glaring. I mean, the BSP charter explicitly states the central bank shall make adequate allowance or establish adequate reserves. But then, the newer dividend law clearly says in no case shall any reserve for whatever purpose be allowed. It's a complete stalemate. If the dividend law applies here, the central bank's emergency fund is dead in the water.
Section 5. What is a GOCC?
Here is the twist, though. The dividend law only actually applies to a very specific type of government entity called a GOCC, or a government-owned or controlled corporation. The legal definition of a GOCC under the Administrative Code gives us a very strict checklist. To be a GOCC, an agency must be organized as either a stock or non-stock corporation, vested with functions relating to public needs. So the court just had to test the central bank against this exact checklist.
Going through this legal checklist, it's pretty fascinating to see how clearly the central bank fails the test. First off, is the BSP a stock corporation? Well, no, it has no voting stockholders. Okay, is it a non-stock corporation? Also no, because it has no members and it's actually required to distribute profits to the government. Because it fits neither category, the central bank completely falls outside the strict legal definition of a GOCC.
Section 6. The Verdict on Independence.
To really grasp the design here, the court looked back at the records of the Constitutional Commission. And there's this powerful quote from Mr. Villegas that perfectly anchors the narrative. You see, the framers intentionally designed the central bank to be completely independent from the executive branch and standard government corporate laws.
They had seen exactly what happened in previous regimes when the government spending authorities and the monetary authorities were combined. It just led to disastrous economic irresponsibility. The central bank absolutely needs strict independence to protect the economy, even if that means shielding it from standard dividend laws.
So, by reading the law impartially, the court determined that the central bank is a totally unique, independent entity. It was intentionally excluded from the general GOCC category. And because it's not a GOCC, it is subject only to its own special charter and is absolutely not governed by the general dividend law. Therefore, if the dividend law doesn't apply to it, there was never any implied repeal to begin with.
Ultimately, the Supreme Court struck down COA's disallowance. The central bank absolutely maintains the legal authority to deduct its reserves from its net earnings before remitting dividends. They get to keep that crucial financial buffer to protect the nation's broader financial stability.
So, what should we all take away from this? This wasn't just some accounting dispute over 9 billion pesos. It was a massive stress test of the nation's economic safeguards. It leaves us with a really provocative thought to ponder. How do we, as a society, maintain that incredibly delicate balance between ensuring strict government accountability for public funds while simultaneously guaranteeing the absolute economic independence required to keep our financial system afloat? It's a tightrope walk for sure, and as this explainer shows, the text of the law is our only balancing pole.